Julian's house was a masterpiece of quiet grief. It was all clean lines and minimalist furniture, vast windows overlooking a garden his late wife, Maya, had planted, but that he now maintained with a dutiful, joyless precision. The silence in the house was a living thing, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the scuff of small sneakers or the distant animated chatter from the playroom. He worked from a studio at the back of the house, an architect who built worlds on paper but could no longer seem to build one for himself. He was a father, a provider, a functioning man, but inside he was a hollowed-out structure, waiting for a wind that would finally bring him down. His twin 6-year-olds, Leo and Luna, were the vibrant, chaotic lifeblood that pulsed through the home's otherwise still veins. Leo was a whirlwind of scraped knees and loud questions, while Luna was his quiet shadow, a creature of deep observation and even deeper feelings. They were Maya's legacy, her laughter and her light distilled into two small, perfect beings, and they were the reason Julian got out of bed every morning, the reason he kept the silence at bay. The first time they disappeared, a cold, sharp panic sliced through him, a feeling so primal it left him breathless. He had been lost in a set of blueprints, the curve of a cantilevered roof consuming his focus, and when he surfaced, the silence was different. It was not the quiet of children occupied. It was the empty quiet of absence. He checked their room, the playroom, the garden. Their small red jackets were gone from the hooks by the door. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of his own making. He had failed. He had looked away for a moment, and the most precious things in his world were gone. He burst out the front door, shouting their names, his voice raw and tight. He scanned the manicured lawns and identical driveways of their quiet suburban street. Nothing. He was about to call the police, his mind already spiraling into the darkest corners of parental fear, when he saw it. 3 houses down, at the end of a winding stone path, was a splash of color, a bright red jacket, then another. The house was an anomaly on their street of muted grays and beiges. It was a cheerful blue cottage with a porch overflowing with potted flowers and a swing painted the color of sunshine. A hand-painted sign near the door read, "The Little Porch Library, take a book, leave a book, share a story." And there, on the top step, sat Leo and Luna, completely enraptured. A woman sat with them, her back to Julian. She had a kind slope to her shoulders and dark hair pulled back in a loose, messy bun. She was reading from a picture book, her voice a low, melodic hum that carried on the afternoon breeze. The twins were leaning against her, one on each side, as if they had known her their entire lives. The panic in Julian's chest receded, replaced by a confusing wave of relief and something else. A dull ache he couldn't name. He walked down the street, his steps heavy. As he got closer, he could hear her voice more clearly. She was doing the voices, a gruff baritone for the bear, and a squeaky lilt for the mouse. Leo giggled, a bright, unrestrained sound that Julian hadn't heard in weeks. "Leo, Luna." His voice was rougher than he intended. 3 heads snapped up. The twins looked at him, their expressions a mixture of guilt and excitement. The woman turned, and he saw her face for the first time. She had warm, intelligent eyes, gentle lines of tiredness etched around them, and a smile that was soft and apologetic. She looked like she belonged on that sunny porch, surrounded by stories and flowers. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice as calm as it had been while reading. "You must be their father. I am so sorry, they just appeared." "We followed the butterfly," Leo announced, pointing to a painted butterfly on her mailbox. "It looked friendly," Luna added softly, her gaze fixed on Julian, gauging his reaction. Julian knelt, trying to keep the lingering fear out of his voice. "You can't just leave the house. You know that. You scared me." "We're sorry, Daddy," they said in unison, their contrition immediate and sincere. The woman stood, brushing off her skirt. "It's my fault, really. I should have walked them straight back. My name is Alara. They were just so sweet, and I got caught up in the story." "Julian," he said, standing up. He felt awkward and large in her gentle, colorful world. "I'm sorry they bothered you." "Bothered me?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "They were a delight. Please, it's no trouble at all." As he took his children's hands to lead them home, Luna turned back to Alara. She looked at the woman, then back at her father, her small face serious with thought. In the quiet way she had, she asked a question not to Julian, but to the near stranger on the porch. "Why is my daddy always so sad in his eyes?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastatingly direct. It was a question no adult had dared to ask him for over a year. Colleagues offered condolences, friends offered distractions, but no one had looked him in the eye and named the thing that lived there. The silence that followed was profound. Julian felt his defenses crumble, the carefully constructed walls of "I'm fine" turning to dust. Alara didn't flinch. She didn't offer a platitude or look away in discomfort. She looked at Julian, her gaze filled with a deep, uncomplicated empathy that was more comforting than any words could have been. She knelt to Luna's level. "Sometimes," she said softly, her voice a balm on the raw wound Luna had just exposed, "grown-ups carry big feelings inside. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means their hearts are a little heavy." She looked up at Julian. "And heavy things need time." He could only nod, his throat tight. He gathered his children and walked home, the echo of Luna's question and Alara's gentle answer following him all the way. That night, after the twins were asleep, he stood in the quiet of his living room and looked at a photograph of Maya on the mantelpiece. For the first time in a long time, he let the sadness wash over him without fighting it. A few days later, Julian was working when he heard the faint chime of his doorbell. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door to find Alara on his doorstep, holding a small, covered basket. "I am so sorry to disturb you," she said, a little flustered. "But your little girl, Luna, she left her drawing at my house the other day. I just found it." She held out a piece of paper, a crayon rendering of a blue house with a yellow sun. "And I was baking and I made too many." She lifted the cloth from the basket, revealing a pile of oatmeal raisin cookies. They weren't perfect circles, they were lumpy and rustic, clearly homemade. The smell was warm and sweet, a scent of simple comfort that felt alien in his sterile home. "You didn't have to do that," he said, but he took the drawing and the basket. "It's nothing," she insisted. "I hope you like them. Have a good day, Julian." She gave him a small, sincere smile and walked away before he could protest further. He closed the door and stood in the hallway, holding the still warm basket. It was such a small gesture, a neighborly kindness, but in his world of transactions and scheduled appointments, this simple, unsolicited act of giving felt monumental. Later, he sat with the twins at the kitchen island. They devoured the cookies, their faces smeared with crumbs, their little legs kicking with pleasure. "The story lady made these," Leo chirped. "She's the best cooker." On a whim, Julian took one for himself. He wasn't a man who ate sweets, but he bit into the cookie. The warmth, the soft texture, the gentle spice of cinnamon, it was a taste of pure, unpretentious care. It tasted like a home he barely remembered. And then something remarkable happened. A genuine smile touched his lips. It wasn't the tight, polite smile he used with clients or the weary, forced smile he gave his children. It was a real, involuntary lifting of the corners of his mouth, a flicker of warmth that spread through his chest. It felt foreign, like a muscle he hadn't used in years. He looked at his children, their faces bright with simple joy over a cookie, and he realized how much of this he had been missing. not just the joy, but the sharing of it, the small connecting threads that weave people together. Ilara's simple, imperfect cookies had done what months of therapy and well-meaning advice could not. They had reminded him what warmth felt like. It became their new, unspoken routine. Every few days the twins would ask, with a hopeful gleam in their eyes, if they could visit the story lady. At first, Julian walked them over, standing awkwardly on the sidewalk as they ran up to Ilara's porch. But Ilara would always invite him to sit, offering him a glass of iced tea or a cup of coffee. He started to accept. He would sit on the cheerful yellow swing, a book open in his lap that he rarely read, and he would just watch. He watched as Ilara patiently helped Leo sound out a difficult word. He watched as she showed Luna how to gently press a flower between the pages of a heavy book. He watched as other neighborhood kids drifted over, drawn by the quiet magic of her porch. She had created a tiny sanctuary, a safe harbor in their quiet suburb. The twins adored her. They brought her little gifts, a smooth stone found in the garden, a dandelion presented with the gravity of a long-stemmed rose, a new crayon drawing every single time. Her fridge, visible through the screen door, was becoming a gallery of their work. She had given him a nickname, too, though she never said it to his face. He'd overheard Luna telling Ilara, "My daddy, the sad giant, likes your cookies." Ilara had shushed her gently, but Julian had heard. The sad giant. It was painfully accurate, yet somehow, coming from his daughter, it felt less like a judgment and more like a simple statement of fact, an observation of the weather. One afternoon, while chasing a grasshopper in Ilara's sprawling, slightly wild garden, Leo tripped and fell, scraping his knee on a stone border. The wail that erupted was immediate and piercing. Julian shot up from the swing, his own heart lurching in that familiar parental panic. He rushed over, ready to scoop Leo up and carry him home for first aid. But Ilara was already there. She didn't panic. She knelt in the dirt, her movements calm and assured. "Oh, my brave explorer," she said, her voice a low murmur. "That looks like a fierce battle wound. Let's get you patched up." Julian stopped a few feet away and just watched. He saw the way she gently wiped the dirt away with a handkerchief she produced from her pocket. He saw the way she distracted Leo with a story about a clumsy badger who always tripped over his own feet. By the time she pulled a brightly colored cartoon bandage from a small tin, Leo's sobs had subsided into sniffles. She pressed the bandage onto his knee with a gentle finality. "There," she said, "a badge of honor." Leo looked at his knee, then at her, and gave her a watery, grateful smile. Julian stood frozen, watching the scene. It wasn't just the practical competence that struck him. It was the tenderness. It was the effortless way she had turned a moment of pain and fear into a moment of comfort and care. It was a grace he tried so hard to emulate, but always felt he was failing at. He was a good father, he knew that. He kept them safe, fed and clothed. But this gentle, intuitive nurturing, this was Maya's language, and Ilara spoke it fluently. That evening, after he had tucked the twins into bed, Julian found a small, folded note in his jacket pocket. Luna must have put it there. He opened it. Inside was not a drawing, but a ticket. In shaky 6-year-old print, it read, "Admit one sad giant to the Kind Friend Club." Below it was a drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall, 2 small, holding hands with a 4th smiling figure under a blue house. He found himself back on her porch the next day, not with the children, but alone. He brought a container of coffee from a small local roaster she had once mentioned she liked. It was a clumsy attempt at reciprocation, an acknowledgement of the club he had apparently been admitted to. She was surprised to see him alone. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "Everything's fine," he said, holding out the coffee. "This is for you. A thank you for yesterday, for everything. She accepted it, her smile warm. You don't have to thank me, Julian. I know. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a lawnmower. He didn't feel the need to fill the space with words, and neither, it seemed, did she. It was in that quiet that he finally spoke about Maya. He didn't plan to. The words just came, softly, hesitantly. He told her about the garden, how it was Maya's design, how he weeded and pruned it because it was the last living thing she had touched. He told her about the silence in his house, how it felt like an accusation. Alara listened. She didn't interrupt or offer advice. She just listened, her gaze steady and compassionate. When he finished, his voice trailing off, she finally spoke. My husband Thomas, he loved to build things, she said, her voice soft with memory. Bookshelves, a birdhouse, that porch swing. After he was gone, I couldn't bring myself to sit on it for almost a year. It felt too empty. But then I realized the swing wasn't empty. It was full of his memory, full of the love he put into building it. She looked at him, her eyes holding a deep, shared understanding. Your house isn't accusing you, Julian. It's remembering her with you. It was a subtle shift in perspective, but it landed in his soul like a seed. For the first time, he considered that the emptiness he felt wasn't a void, but a space filled with love that had nowhere to go. They were two people sitting on a sun-drenched porch, quietly tending to the gardens of their grief. A few weeks later, Alara had a bad day. Julian saw it from his window. A man in a crisp suit, a neighbor from a few streets over known for his perpetual scowl and pristine lawn, was standing on her sidewalk, gesturing angrily at the little porch library. His voice was sharp and loud enough for Julian to hear snippets. Unauthorized, liability, property values. Alara stood on her porch, her arms crossed, her posture straight, but Julian could see the tension in her shoulders. She was polite but firm, her voice never rising. Eventually the man huffed, made a note on a clipboard, and stormed off. Alara watched him go, and for a long moment after he was gone, she just stood there. Then, with a visible slump, she went inside, letting the screen door swing shut behind her. The porch, usually a hub of quiet activity, was empty for the rest of the afternoon. The "Sorry, we're closed" sign, usually reserved for rainy days, was hung on the door. Later that evening, long after the twins were asleep, Julian saw a light was still on in her living room. He walked over, a nameless impulse guiding his feet. He didn't knock. He just sat on the steps, the same steps where he'd first seen his children with her. He waited. After a few minutes, the screen door creaked open. She came out, wrapped in a blanket, and sat down beside him. Not on the step above or below, but right next to him. Couldn't sleep? He asked softly. She shook her head, pulling the blanket tighter. He's filing a formal complaint with the Homeowners Association. Says my little library is a nuisance. Her voice was brittle. It's just books. It's just a place for kids to feel welcome. He saw the glint of tears in her eyes in the dim porch light. He saw the brave face she had put on earlier crumble into genuine hurt. His first instinct was to fix it, to tell her he would hire a lawyer, that he would handle it. But he remembered the lesson of the scraped knee. Sometimes the most important thing was not to fix, but to comfort. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't make promises. He just sat there with her in the quiet darkness. After a long moment, he said the only thing that felt true. You don't have to be strong all the time, Alara. A choked sob escaped her. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and the tears she had been holding back finally fell. He didn't move. He just sat there, a solid, quiet presence in the dark, offering the silent support he was only just learning how to give. In that shared moment of vulnerability, a new, deeper trust was forged between them, stronger than any words. It was the quiet acceptance of another's pain, the simple act of staying. His gestures of kindness began to change after that night. They became more specific, more observant. He noticed that she always drank Earl Grey tea in the mornings, so a small, artisan box of it appeared on her porch steps one day. He saw her struggling to reach a climbing rose that had grown too high, and the next afternoon, a sturdy and elegant new trellis was leaning against her fence, no note attached. He learned that Luna loved books about stars and Leo loved books about dinosaurs, and he would return from his business trips with carefully chosen volumes for her little library. These weren't grand gestures, they were small, quiet acts of attention. He was showing her, in the only way he knew how, that he was paying attention, that he saw her. Their friendship deepened in the gentle rhythm of these shared days. But the shift, the undeniable turn toward something more, came on a cold, rainy Tuesday. Luna woke up with a fever. She was listless, her skin hot to the touch, her usual quietness replaced by a weary fragility that terrified Julian. He was a competent man. He could design a skyscraper, manage a team of engineers, but the sight of his sick child reduced him to a bundle of raw nerves. He fumbled with the thermometer, his hands shaking. He paced the floor, his mind a frantic mess of worst-case scenarios. He didn't even remember making the decision to call her. He just found himself on the phone, his voice tight with panic. "I don't know what to do. Her fever is so high." "I'm coming over," she said, her voice a lifeline of calm in his storm. She arrived minutes later, her hair damp from the rain, carrying a small bag. She didn't take over, but she gently guided. She showed him how to place a cool cloth on Luna's forehead, her touch infinitely more gentle than his own clumsy attempts. She coaxed Luna into sipping some water. She sat by the bed and read from a book in a low, soothing voice, her presence alone seeming to lower the temperature in the room. "We should take her to the doctor," Julian finally said, his voice strained, "just to be sure." "Okay," Alara agreed without hesitation. "I'll come with you." In the car, Alara sat in the back with the twins, murmuring to a sleepy Luna and keeping a restless Leo occupied with a quiet game. Julian drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, but her calm presence in his rearview mirror was an anchor. At the clinic, she held his hand in the waiting room, a simple, grounding touch that said everything he needed to hear. "You are not alone in this. It turned out to be a simple childhood virus, scary but not dangerous." The doctor sent them home with instructions for rest and fluids. By evening, Luna's fever had broken, and she was sleeping peacefully in her bed, her breathing deep and even. Julian and Alara sat in the dim light of the living room, exhausted. The rain had stopped and the world outside was quiet and clean. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I panicked. You were so calm." "You're her father," Alara said softly. "It's your job to panic. It's a friend's job to bring the thermometer and a steady hand." He looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the tiredness in her eyes, but also the deep, unwavering well of strength and kindness that resided there. He saw the woman who had welcomed his runaway children, who had healed a scraped knee with a story, who had cried on his shoulder, and who had just held his family together through a small but terrifying crisis. Before he could say anything more, a tiny voice came from the doorway. Luna stood there, wrapped in her favorite blanket, her eyes heavy with sleep. She walked over and crawled into Julian's lap, curling up against his chest. She looked over at Alara, a sleepy, contented smile on her face. "I like when the story lady is here," she murmured, her voice muffled against his shirt. "She makes your face less sad, Daddy." Julian's breath caught in his chest. He held his daughter tighter, burying his face in her soft hair to hide the sudden sting in his eyes. He felt Alara's gaze on him, warm and understanding. From her own quiet corner of the sofa, Alara watched them, She saw the way Julian's broad shoulders, which always seemed to carry the weight of the world, finally relaxed as he held his daughter. She saw the way his hand stroked Luna's back, a gesture of pure, unguarded love. And hearing Luna's simple, profound words, something inside her heart clicked into place. She had been so careful, so guarded. Her own grief had taught her self-reliance, had taught her to build walls to protect her own fragile peace. But this quiet, sad man and his two beautiful children had dismantled those walls brick by brick, not with force, but with a persistent, gentle presence. She had told herself she was just being a good neighbor, a kind friend, but as she watched him comfort his daughter, his face softened by love and relief. She could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with him. She was falling for the sad giant, for the quiet strength behind his sorrow, for the devoted father who was slowly, bravely learning to let the light back in. It was a terrifying and wonderful realization, and it settled in her heart with the quiet certainty of a story finding its final, perfect chapter. The peace of that evening was shattered a week later by a certified letter. The Homeowners Association had officially reviewed the complaint from her neighbor. The letter was cold and bureaucratic, citing bylaws about running a business from a residential property and potential insurance liabilities. It gave her 30 days to dismantle the little porch library or face escalating fines. Alara read the letter 3 times, the clinical, impersonal words blurring before her eyes. It felt like such a violation. Her library wasn't a business, it was a gift. It was a tiny beacon of community she had built, from love and secondhand books. To have it reduced to a zoning violation felt like a physical blow. She folded the letter with trembling hands, the joy and warmth of her small world suddenly feeling fragile and threatened. She didn't tell Julian. She didn't want to burden him. This was her fight, her problem to solve. She spent days researching, making calls, her frustration mounting with every bureaucratic dead end she hit. The strength she had always relied on felt thin and worn, and a quiet despair began to settle over her. But Julian noticed the change. He saw the forced brightness in her smile, the new tension around her eyes. The closed sign was up on the porch library more often than not. When he asked if everything was all right, she would just shake her head and say she was tired. But he knew it was more than that. He had learned to read her silences as well as he read her smiles. His instincts, honed by years of professional problem-solving, kicked in. He didn't pry. He observed. He saw her on the phone, looking frustrated. He saw the thick envelope with the HOA's letterhead in her recycling bin. It didn't take an architect to see the structure of her problem. He didn't tell her what he was doing. He knew she was proud, that she would resist the idea of being rescued, so he didn't try to rescue her. He set about quietly giving her the tools she needed to rescue herself. He spent a night poring over the town's zoning ordinances and the HOA's convoluted bylaws. As an architect, he understood the language of permits and regulations better than most. He found loopholes, clauses about community enrichment projects and non-profit endeavors. Then he made a call to an old friend from college, a sharp, compassionate lawyer who specialized in community law. He explained the situation, and his friend agreed to help, pro bono, framing it as an act of community service. Julian's only instruction to the lawyer was to empower Alara, not to take over for her. A few days later, Alara received a call from a lawyer she had never heard of. The woman introduced herself and explained that an anonymous neighbor, a fan of the porch library, had arranged for her services to help formalize the library as a registered community free book exchange, a designation that would protect it from the HOA's complaints. She was presented with a clear, simple path forward, a solution that had seemed impossible just days before. Alara was stunned, grateful, and deeply suspicious. An anonymous neighbor, There was only one person it could be. That evening she walked over to his house, the lawyer's paperwork clutched in her hand. She found him in his garden, methodically pulling weeds from around Maya's rose bushes. "It was you," she said, her voice not angry, but full of a complex mix of emotions. "The lawyer, the anonymous neighbor." Julian stopped his work and stood up, wiping the dirt from his hands. He didn't deny it. He just met her gaze, his own expression steady and open. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why go behind my back?" He took a step closer, his eyes full of a sincerity that disarmed her. "Because this isn't about me solving your problems. It was never about that. I saw you were fighting, and I just wanted to make sure you had the right sword and shield." He paused, searching for the right words. "You spend all your time creating this safe, magical world for my children, for all the children. You protect them. You nurture them." He took another step, closing the distance between them. "Please, Elara, let me protect you." His words struck her to the core. It wasn't a declaration of power or an offer of rescue. It was an offer of partnership, of mutual care. He saw her strength and wanted to guard it, not replace it. The last of her resistance melted away. The fear, the pride, the weary self-reliance, it all gave way to a profound sense of being seen, of being cherished. In the fading light of the garden, surrounded by the scent of roses and damp earth, she looked at him. The sad giant who was no longer quite so sad. The quiet man who spoke in actions louder than any words. The tears that welled in her eyes were not of frustration or sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude and a love that felt as real and solid as the ground beneath her feet. Without a word, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers, calloused and strong, laced through hers. It was the first time they had touched with such clear, unambiguous intent. It wasn't a comforting gesture in a crisis or a friendly pat on the arm. It was a connection, a silent acknowledgement of the shift that had been happening between them for months. In the quiet of his late wife's garden, they stood together, hand in hand, and chose to start a new story. With the legal threat resolved and the little porch library officially recognized as a community asset, a new sense of lightness settled over their small world. To celebrate, Julian had an idea. It started as a sketch on a napkin and grew into a full set of blueprints. It was a project born of love, designed with the precision of an architect and the heart of a man who had finally found his way home. He didn't build a new bookshelf. He built a pavilion. In the corner of Elara's front yard, where the lawn met the garden, a beautiful open-air structure of warm cedar and smooth stone began to take shape. It had a proper roof to protect the books from rain, built-in benches for children to sit on, and solar-powered lights that would cast a soft, welcoming glow in the evenings. It was a permanent, beautiful, and undeniable home for her library. It was his love language translated into wood and stone. He organized a small, grand opening for the new story pavilion. He invited the whole neighborhood, even the grumpy neighbor who had started it all. It wasn't an act of spite, but an act of radical community, an invitation to come into the circle of warmth Elara had created. The day of the opening was bright and clear. The yard was filled with families, the sound of children's laughter mingling with the gentle murmur of adult conversation. Elara moved through the crowd, her face radiant, stopping to thank everyone for coming. Julian watched her from the steps of the new pavilion, his heart full. When the time came, he stepped forward to say a few words. His voice, usually so reserved, was clear and steady as it carried over the quiet crowd. "I'm not much of a public speaker," he began, a small, wry smile on his face. "I'm better with buildings. Buildings are about creating shelter, about creating spaces where people can feel safe and build lives. For a long time, my own life felt like a house with empty rooms. He looked at Alara, his gaze locking with hers. And then my kids, in their infinite 6-year-old wisdom, led me to a blue house down the street. They led me to Alara and her library. And I learned that the best shelters aren't made of wood and stone. They're made of kindness. They're made of stories. They're made of people who show up. He turned to Leo and Luna, who were sitting on the front bench, looking up at him with wide, proud eyes. He knelt before them, holding 2 small velvet boxes. "I have something for you both," he said softly, his voice for them alone, though the crowd watched in hushed silence. He opened the boxes. Inside each was a simple silver locket. "Leo, Luna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mom, Maya, will always be a part of our story. She is in every memory, in every part of this garden, and most of all, she is in you." He opened one locket, revealing a tiny, perfect photo of Maya, smiling. "This is so you never forget her light." He then opened the second locket. Inside was a small photo of Alara, her face crinkled in a warm laugh. "And this," he continued, his voice breaking just a little, "is so you always remember that it's okay for a story to have a new chapter. It's okay for a heart to have enough room for more than one home. Alara has shown us how to read again, how to laugh again, and I want her to be a part of our story, forever." He placed the lockets around their necks, kissing each of them on the forehead. Then he stood up and turned to Alara. The entire world seemed to shrink until it was only the 2 of them. "Alara," he said, his voice raw with a vulnerability he no longer tried to hide. "You came into our quiet, sad world, and you filled it with stories and light. You taught my children about kindness, and you taught me about hope. You showed me that a home isn't a place, it's a person. It's the person who stays." He took her hand, the one that had held his in the sterile waiting room of the clinic. "I love you, and I want to build the rest of my life, the rest of our story, with you." A collective, gentle sigh went through the crowd. Alara's eyes were shining with tears as she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I love you too, Julian," she whispered for only him to hear. Later that evening, long after the last guest had departed, the 4 of them sat together on the wide, comfortable swing on Alara's porch. The new pavilion stood before them, its soft lights glowing in the twilight, a testament to their new beginning. Leo and Luna, tired from the day's excitement, were curled up and sleepy, one nestled against Julian, the other against Alara. The silence that settled around them was not the empty, aching silence of Julian's old house. It was a peaceful, contented silence, full of the quiet hum of a family finally at rest, of a story that had found its way to a happy, hopeful beginning. On the central post of the new story pavilion, a small hand-painted sign had been hung, put there by Alara earlier that day. In her graceful, flowing script, it read simply, "Every story deserves a home." Julian looked from the sign to the woman beside him, to the children breathing softly in their sleep, and he knew with a certainty that filled every hollow space inside him that he was finally truly home.